So I was losing you all a little bit in your back and forth on, and I can't tell if it's because it was a late night last night or because I haven't had any food, but I am feeling everything's moving a little slower for me this morning.
Should have had a bowl of sausage.
I know. I walked in, I was like, what's in a bowl? And it was sausage.
Yeah. It was in a cup yesterday.
You had it in a cup yesterday?
I had it in a cup yesterday.
Did you drink
I couldn't find the bowls. So I just got a coffee cup, and they're insulated.
I'm at
just
it.
fine.
That's right.
Tyler's like, you eating sausage out of a cup? I'm like,
What kind of question is that?
Hey, obviously. Listen, I'm from Baytown.
obviously. This is a step up, baby. What are you talking about?
I'm using a fork.
Yeah,
That's
it's
right.
in a cup, not in my hand. Come on. There we go.
That's good.
So yeah, when you're talking the difference between autobiography and memoirs, I could not care any less.
Yeah, your body language said it.
I was staring at the red light like, when is this conversation going to be over?
It was at the most zone out posture I've ever seen, because you're actually typically super interested.
It's true. It's true.
Because you like engagement, you like thinking, you like learning.
Yeah.
When it comes to autobiography and memoir,
We found the cutoff.
That's right.
Joey's out.
Joey's out. Daniel chapter 6 is where we are. We would encourage you to read it for yourself. And again, I'm just quite, there's about to be some chapters in Daniel that isn't so intuitive. But thus far, there's been some things that have been really intuitive. Why are you looking at her like that?
Oh, nothing.
I missed it.
He was like looking at you like, what's he saying?
I was looking for a reaction, but I didn't get one.
Oh, because you think that it is intuitive? Do you think the rest of the chapters in Daniel
Oh,
are
no,
intuitive?
the rest aren't intuitive at all. They jump around chronologically. They go in and out of different genres.
Yeah. So thus far in the narrative, it has been quite intuitive. There's been some time jumps and some things, but we would encourage you to read this for yourself. And so I'm going to go ahead and summarize it, and we'll go back and kind of highlight some commentary things about it. So what we see here at the end of chapter 5, verse 31, is that the Medes have taken over and taken power. Their king is Darius. And so Darius comes in, and so real quick, I have to add this little piece of commentary, because I immediately begin wondering, who in the world are the Medes?
Joey just says, we're going to do the whole thing, no commentary.
I know.
Gets up to verse 1, he's like, it's not my rule.
No.
The two of you shut it, but I'm going to give commentary.
Y'all give no commentary, but I have the mic.
I do.
Let the listener and those at the podcast table understand.
Hey, I warned you all. I wasn't all here this morning.
You're good, man. You do you, buddy.
And also, I don't want to do what he's about to do, nor could I. So we like to make fun of you, but you're actually the glue, Joey, so go.
So you got these people, and they're Persians, and so you've got the Medes and the Persians, and there's this relationship between Darius and Cyrus, all right, that are both leading this, but the Medes are in control, Darius is in control, and so he sets up 120 governors all over the kingdom and appoints 3 officials to support that governor, and he spreads them out, all right, and so Daniel was one of those appointed officials. And again, this text highlights Daniel's character and more specifically his spirit, which was excellent. So Darius was going to go ahead and set him all over the whole kingdom, and we'll get into why and what was Darius's personality and the way in which he led and why he was like that. But the other officials and other governors got jealous that Darius wanted to make Daniel over all the kingdom, and so they wanted to find something against him. And so they searched and they couldn't find anything against him, and so they go and they trick Darius the king to go ahead and try to basically turn Darius against Daniel so that Daniel would get in trouble, and the punishment being the lion's den, all right? And so when they go to him and tell him, hey, so what was I'm trying to think of what exactly was, if anyone, was it petitioned another god other than Darius? Mm-hmm. That was the rule. So for
30 days.
So for 30 days, yeah. And so then Daniel goes, and I love that it highlights the fact that he was in a window so that people could be seen, and we'll talk about his motivation in that or not motivation in that. And he goes and he prays, and they see him. And so they're like, ooh, Darius, he, went against the decree. And so you got to throw him in the lion's den. And so then the governor, the king did not want to do that. Darius did not want to do that. But they were like, no, you've got to do it. So they throws him in the lion's den, and Darius has a sleepless night. He was worried for Daniel, but when he shows back up in the morning, of course, Daniel lives. Then you got some really dark stuff happening.
He was like, please don't. Please, we don't want to talk about this
seriously.
part.
It's one of those, remember when we did the Set the Story Straight, and we didn't do this one, but we should have done this one because this is a dark story that we tell in children's church. But their punishment for tricking the king was that their children, and their wives were all fed to the lion. And
their bones were crushed.
Their bones, bones
and
were crushed.
the lions were hungry.
And then, we have this thing from Darius at the end, and he kind of doubles up or doubles down, from when Nebuchadnezzar kind of saw after the fire furnace what happened. Darius says, tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is a living God enduring forever, and his kingdom shall never be destroyed. And then it says Daniel prospers under the rest of Darius's reign.
Kings don't sleep much in the book of Daniel.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
They're always getting woke up.
Yeah.
Restlessness.
Yeah,
for sure. So there, while it is a pretty straightforward narrative, there is so many layers to this and so many things that we could pull out. And so I don't know where you guys want to start. Let's go back to the beginning of chapter 6. What are some things you'd like to highlight or point out here from a commentary perspective?
We have texted less over this than we normally do. I don't know what y'all are coming up with, except I know Jeff wants to talk about the satraps. So go, Jeff.
I got like a long riff on. No, one thing you mentioned, curious y'all's thoughts. So looked into this a little bit. Darius and Cyrus, the predominant view is that's the same person. And so the very last verse of chapter 6, scroll down to it, Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. This is, we talked about this, I don't remember which week it was, Lori. NASB had it written one way, ESV had it written another, so we kind of took two different things away from it. ESV is one of the ones that says it that way, but there are other versions, and again, the scholarly consensus is that that's basically saying the reign of Darius, who is Cyrus the Persian, kind of thing. So it's kind of like, it's interesting because Cyrus is the name we remember from the decree to go back and rebuild Jerusalem and all that later on.
Right.
It's this guy. So you kind of wonder if that does hold up under scrutiny, which it seems to, Cyrus is his later edict because of the influence of a guy like Daniel.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that's why it kind of, it could matter.
Yeah, it could. And also I wonder, much like Darius, who Darius did hear of the story of the fiery furnace. Like he heard about Daniel, clearly because he put Daniel in charge. Like Daniel had a reputation. And so he saw before how God had rescued. I mean, he even says this, and we're jumping ahead in the context a little bit, but in the text, but it's almost like, hey, your God rescued your people before in the fiery furnace, and so I hope he does it again, essentially. So he kind of knows. And so I guess I go back to your point, which is whether it is two different people or the same person, like if I could make an argument, it still could be another person because Cyrus could have learned
the
or known.
Medo-Persian Empire over this before they sent them back?
It wasn't within the year.
I was going to say, it wasn't
happening.
long. Yeah, it was quick.
Which probably adds to the argument that
it's the same person.
Cyrus, if it's the key there. Hey, I mean, you think, man, that's really quick because Belshazzar was killed the night Daniel gave that thing.
Right.
And Darius/Cyrus came in, took it over. So I'm guessing Daniel would have kind of already been, like, did they just move into leadership kind of thing?
The research that I saw on that said that was actually pretty normal.
Okay.
Was that they would leave in the top advisors.
Just keep a steadiness in that makes sense.
It was interesting because the analogy that they made was like, unlike coaches at professional football teams who go in and take everybody out and they bring their own people in, most of the time a conquering king would leave the top advisors. Again, mostly because it's not that easy. It's not like they know each other. It's not that and they're trying to keep stability for a little while until they're trying, until they figure something else out.
Well, I guess so since we're talking about whether it's Darius or Cyrus, here's what I do know, and I'd be curious to study when Cyrus is mentioned later and how he acts and how he leads, because what's clear about Darius here, in my opinion, is he is susceptible to what people want from him. There's a little bit of like, he wanted to put Daniel in charge. did he not like leading? Did he not want to make hard decisions? I mean, there's a cadence that started here throughout the text where he just kind of goes where the wind blows, as opposed to leading with a stronger hand. He's definitely the anti-Nebuchadnezzar, because Nebuchadnezzar was strong. He was violent. He was more erratic, and Darius isn't really that.
It seems like his leadership approach and the scope is very different, or at least it's broader than the prior king. Because the satrap, my one little riff on that, you guys know this, but is means prince or president or governor. So, it's kind of one of those things that there's no words wasted in Scripture. So why do we need to know there's 120 satraps? Okay, we'll take the word satrap and change it to governor. There's 120 governors. A governor would have overseen a province, a large area. So there's at least 120 large areas that are coming back to him. You know what I mean? So he can't rule with an iron fist in the same way because it's not quite it can't be quite as hands-on. But where's Daniel? Like, he's one of the guys that these 120 governors are reporting to. Like, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And another way to think about it is that as amazing as Babylon was, they were actually a small part of the Persian Empire once they fell.
Right.
So, let's get this in perspective.
Yeah.
Cyrus is the ruler of a lot more territories than Babylon. Babylon is actually small fish compared to the entire Persian Empire. So maybe part of your answer to your question, Joey, is that Nebuchadnezzar was only ruling Babylon. Cyrus is ruling all of Persia, and Babylon is now, overnight, a tiny piece of that.
Yeah. I just think the way this story unfolds is you start with right out of the gates, like you ask the question why. Maybe I'm just thinking a little bit, maybe critically is the wrong way, but 120, larger land, I hear you both, but you could look at it as, wow, what a good leader. He is multiplying his leadership. But then you follow that up with, so he's giving away leadership there. Then he wants to give it to Daniel. And then these people come to him and he doesn't ask any questions. He's just like, okay, yeah, that sounds good. Let's make a decree. And then they come to him and they force him. And he's like, I don't really want to do that. And then he's sitting, it says he had a sleepless night and there was no accommodations brought to him, which means no concubines, which means no entertainment, no music. He didn't want anything. But he sat there and he knew what was happening was wrong. And he didn't stand up and lead and make any changes.
He can't. It's the law of the Medo-Persians.
Yeah, I mean, he has no autonomy. It's a superseded thing.
Sure. I just see a guy who just kind of sloughs and sloughs, continually sloughed throughout. That, I mean, again, that's a lens, perhaps.
Yeah, that's a lens, and I mean, it's one of those things. It's not wrong in principle, but historically speaking, I don't know if that would hold up. Just because, again, you can't equate their life with how we would lead or govern with the laws that we have. It was just a totally different thing. I mean, just even the idea of, I think it's funny that he's willing to let people pray to him for 30 days. Not 31 days, not any longer than that, but just for a short time. It's okay for everybody to kind of put their focus on me. But it's even that, it's like, well, no, it wouldn't even happen now. Like, we would, kick somebody out of office to make that an official thing.
Well,
so it's just a different thing.
If we can shift to that, they completely lie to the king about it. I mean,
they had an agenda, yeah.
For sure. I mean, verse 7 is in quotes. They are saying, all the commissioners of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps and the high officials and the governors have consulted. Well, that's not true. We know at the very least Daniel wasn't consulted, and he's a high official. You know what I mean? I think we're getting in trouble here with all of this sort of absolute language. Their plan depends on the king's ego. And so they need it. They need to say, everyone feels this way about you. We all agree. When I read that, I was like, whoa, you don't all agree.
Yeah.
It's not true.
Anytime somebody says, well, everybody's saying, they're like, are they?
But are they?
Everybody. You literally talk to everybody.
I'm guilty of that. I say things like, oh, I never.
Sure.
It's really not never. I just don't usually.
Right, typically, right. Yeah. Joe, you asked a question, or you made a comment in your review about them, going to, it was about Daniel praying where he could be seen. One of these things, it's like the archaeological evidence says that the windows would have been like really high and really small to keep sun out, animals out, that kind of thing. So they wouldn't have been able just to see him by passing by. Like they would have had to position themselves in a certain way. You know what I mean?
It was set up.
They were trying to catch
It was
him.
set up.
Yeah, and they knew they could do it because he was so consistent with this discipline.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
kind of the morning, noon, night deal.
I love that too. Like the plan that they come up with does depend on Darius's ego, but it also depends on Daniel's faithfulness.
Yep.
That's how they knew they could get away with this. They knew they could
used both
flatter the
things
king.
against
That's
them.
right.
Yep.
And they knew that Daniel would be faithful.
Yeah, and I think that, I don't want to get to application too quickly because I still want to make sure we're covering the text well, but I just love the fact that he knew it and he still was faithful and he did it and he prayed and he made time for it and he was still this high-ranking official. He was under this persecution. They were watching out for him and he still was able to do it. And I think we'll come back to that later because I want to ask you guys some questions around that. But anything else with the text that we feel like would be helpful for the listener to kind of know or understand here about this story?
I mean, I think verse 10 is so key. We're still on the Daniel praying thing. I just read it. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, so he knew about it. So maybe they had everybody had been talked to. I don't know, or at least had heard rumors about it. Document had been signed. He went to his house where he had windows, upper chamber, toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. Just the fact that he was still praying toward Jerusalem, the city that had been destroyed. But that's still the city that represented God's presence. I mean, just every bit of that's an act of faith. You know, it's an act of faith in not only who God is, but what God would eventually do. Like, we will go back. I mean, there's just the act of faith in verse 10 is, I don't know, pretty strong, pretty striking. And another thing that stood out to me is verse 17 and verse 19, just the kind of the foreshadowing of the resurrection.
100%.
You know, the stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, you know, verse 17. At the break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of the lions.
That
I mean,
language
there's just so much good stuff there. Just kind of make you pause as you're reading it.
Yeah, for sure. I thought of same sort of thing in that section with the praying. I thought about Solomon's prayer in 1 Kings when he's dedicating the temple. And, you know, he literally prays that God will hear the prayers of his people if they ever go into captivity. And I wondered, you know, like, did Daniel know that? Did he know that part of, you know, that was part of it? Like, if we ever go into captivity, will you still continue to hear our prayers?
Yeah.
And there was just kind of a sweetness of seeing God answering whatever Daniel was praying.
Yeah.
He was with him.
Yeah, that's good. Application-wise, I mean, lots and lots of things.
Many.
Yeah, the thing that I come back to was Daniel was able to work hard and pray hard. You know, to be known as a faithful and a devout person, to be faultless and excellent as a hard worker, and to balance both of those things. It wasn't an either or, but when people watched him, you know, they saw something different in him. You know, Darius admired Daniel's piety, and it's interesting. People will admire piety in other people, but not necessarily acknowledge it in themselves. You know, you ever been in that situation where someone's like, "Man, I so respect you for what you have in your life," and sometimes it doesn't really check to make their own heart and their own spirit.
You're like, you know what, you can have that. Like, it's not about me.
Totally.
This is actually available to you. This kind of faithfulness, this kind of, I guess the word you used was piety.
Yeah.
It's available to you.
Yeah, totally.
I'm glad you admire it in me. Thank you.
Yeah.
But also,
Right.
it's not special about me.
Yep, absolutely. And then Hebrews 11, I had, you know, what faith is. I don't think we've really drilled down on like the faith conversation. You know, what does it mean to be faithful? You know, we talk about God's sovereignty and just trusting him and like all the hard things that happen, but he's still in control. But like to just live boldly and confidently. You know, Hebrews 11:1 says, now that faith is assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen, for by it the people of old received their commendation. By faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. And then you skip all the way down. And Daniel's name isn't overtly mentioned,
right?
But it says in verse 32, at the end of verse 32, it alludes to, you know, prophets in verse 33, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire. And so, yeah, anyway, just I love that.
Yeah, and just to tag on to that too, as you're saying this, is what I'm thinking, because in our culture, this is the second time now we've looked at our culture today, but we tend to equate optics with faithfulness today. It's what you look like when you worship. You know, somebody that is very expressive and very whatever, hands up and all this, they're the ones that really love God, and the old guy standing next to them with their hands in their pockets really doesn't. We attribute somebody with great verbal skills to communicate something more spiritual than somebody that doesn't. Somebody that, you know what I mean? Like all these things that are really all optics based. And all we see from Daniel, who's credited as, you know, there again, kind of,
in the Hall of Faith.
It's almost perfectly in the Hall of Faith, but not by name.
Yeah.
Like he's just going about his life.
Yeah.
He's just being faithful, consistent, continuing to pray, continuing to know. He would have known as good or better than anybody that we're going to be here for 70 years and they're getting towards the end of this. So I should start. Thinking. If I haven't prayed toward Jerusalem in a while, I should start now because we're about to go back. You know, it's like he's just being faithful day after day after day. And I mean, to the point that we even see, like on the episode last week, we talked about how he just kind of is just like, hey, look, here's the deal. You know, he kind of gets to that point where it's like, I'm not trying to impress anybody. I'm just going to tell you the straight truth.
Right.
Kind of thing, but in a very non-look at me sort of way. And I don't know, there's just, to me, that's a big thing to take away from this is we can't judge people's faithfulness just by the optics.
Yeah.
Like, you really have to watch them over time. And I don't know.
Long obedience in the same direction.
Just such a good reminder looking at his life.
Yeah. Joey, I agree with that completely. And a little bit later in Hebrews 11:34, quenched the power, escaped the edge of the sword. From weakness, we're made strong. And sometimes I think we forget that part of faith.
Yeah.
Like, my biggest confession of faith is when I say, I am weak, but I believe you're strong. And I believe in the promise that my weakness makes me strong because it forces me into dependence on you.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of our faith. And to your point, Jeff, optics are never going to show you that humble moment where I force myself to say, I am weak. There's nothing I can do in this lion's den. I have faith.
Yeah, I don't remember the verse. You probably do, but because you're smarter than me. But God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. Yep. And a lot of times it's like, what does that even mean? It means it's given an avenue to show itself.
Yep.
You know, that's the direction of God's strength is through our weakness. Like that's where it finds an avenue to be seen.
Yeah, I was sitting at a table this semester, well, multiple tables during the men's studies on Friday mornings, and they were doing Daniel, and there was several different Fridays at different tables where guys, the conversation was led to a place of like, man, Daniel's just like this, you know, he just flexes on him. He's just this all-star faithful guy, and like, it kind of makes me feel guilty because I'm not. And I like that you pointed that out, Laura. It's like, no, I think Daniel he realized like his need. You know, he was in a really, really precarious, difficult circumstance where he was forced for survival purposes to adapt to a culture, to a foreign culture that was anti-Yahweh. And you just follow this story of 70, 80 years of him just kind of being a place of dependence. And so, we see the highlights of that. But but what you also see, what I love about 6 is you do see him praying. Yep. And I think we're going to come back, hopefully next week and talk about, his prayer in 9. But like, there's just this absolute surrender that he needed to have in his posture. So when we talk about faith, it's not about being a superstar. It's not about just flexing on him. It's not. It is this understanding of your daily dependence on the Lord.
Well, and I think there's a striking, as y'all were reading this, were you thinking about 3 and the fiery furnace?
Yeah,
like there's a lot of the same,
a
lot of the same language. And I was thinking through, like, because I was thinking, like, what do we talk about? I feel like we already kind of did this chapter. So I was thinking through what the differences were. And I thought, you know what? Unlike Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel wasn't asked to worship another god. He was just asked to omit worshiping his God for a temporary amount of time.
Right.
Like, he wasn't being asked to commit worship to another God.
But if he's going to worship.
But he was being asked to omit worship of his one true God. And he wouldn't, and he didn't. And that showed his faith. Like just as, I mean, this is kind of, I hope I'm
Yeah.
bolstering your point, Joey, that showed his faith just as much as standing up for, no, I will not worship this God, showed, the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's faith. So I just thought it was kind of an interesting,
No, I like that.
distinction.
I mean, and this is definitely me kind of reading a little bit more, but he also going with the dependence thing and the need for God. He's like, I can't go more than 30 days without.
I can't do it.
And
So I don't even go today.
Yeah, right.
That's right.
I do this 3 times a day every day.
Yeah.
Like,
And I think what would that look like for us if we actually believe that the way in which Daniel
So
believed
good,
that?
Joey.
Yeah, well, I don't know where I had this note from. I didn't attribute it to anybody, but I know it's not my thought because it's really concise. But the kind of the rubric you see him using, and I think that we can apply is we stand up. What's the disobedience? Civil disobedience, whatever. If it's going to cause me or someone else to sin, that's when we push back. If it violates my conscience, you push back. Or does it increase or take away freedom in my relationship or my ability to love God and love others? Like if it doesn't violate one of those 3, just be like Daniel. Just kind of work through the system, work in the system. But when push comes to shove, if those one of those 3 things starts to get violated, that's when you know what? I know you told me not to. I'm going to have to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Respectfully, quietly. Again, he didn't do it on his rooftop.
That's right.
He went to his normal place. And, if they chose to find fault with that, that's on them, not on him.
Right.
Well, and I love Joey's point of he has to, it's not so much that he chooses to stand up. He has to. Like, it is a part of who he is to be in fellowship and relationship with God. And he's not going to rationalize. I mean, I can see myself rationalizing, like, I mean, it's just 30 days.
Right.
I mean, I hope I wouldn't, but I can see myself doing that. And he's like, it's not so much that it's just 30 days. I can't make it 30 days without this.
Yeah. And it goes back to, how do we be, in the world, not of the world, when it came to him and his friends adapting to their culture.
Right.
It was like, it's up into a line. And that, Jeff, that was your point. It's up to a line. And I think, it's just.
And I think that conscience piece is big. It's almost like, pull on this, y'all jump in and pile on, but like, would he have been sinning not to pray 3 times a day towards Jerusalem and just pray at night on his bed when he knows nobody can see him? Like, would that have been a sin?
According to the law?
Practically speaking? Or would be a sin because it would violate his own conscience for what he needed to do?
I think it violates the law at that point, doesn't it?
Oh, no, do they have to pray 3 times a day towards Jerusalem?
Probably. No, that's something that got added on. You're right.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's not in the Deuteronomy 28
because
chapters.
this is wisdom literature. Remember we talked about that like week 1. It's like this used to be in the wisdom literature part. Like, what's the wisdom piece of that? Like, how do you discern that?
Yeah.
I think we talked about this, I think on week 1. Daniel's extraordinary ability to stay culturally relevant without becoming spiritually irrelevant is something that I should study and pray for.
Say that again. His ability to
stay culturally relevant, because he's 80 years old. He is still culturally relevant. He is still useful in a foreign exiled nation.
That's a different way of using the phrase culturally relevant than anyone ever used it, and that is a much better way to use it.
He's still useful
really good.
in that culture.
Being useful.
But he's not spiritually irrelevant, and they know it. That's how they caught him on it. So he has somehow managed to be useful in the culture in which God has placed him.
That's good.
And useful for the kingdom of God. Like, he's got the now and the not yet down.
Yeah, she's preaching.
Sorry, I kind of did it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's good.
I think taking a step to really just apply that in this season where, the election is over and it's behind us, and there's just this reality that how do we do that? How do we keep the now and would you say the now?
The now and the not yet.
Yeah. How do we keep that perspective, and how do we live for what's eternal in the midst of this? Yeah.
Can I give some suggestions?
Sure. Yeah.
He said how. I'm like, okay.
I have answers. Yeah.
I don't really. The Bible has answers.
Yeah.
I do not have answers. Go to the Sermon on the Mount. Go listen to our series on the Sermon on the Mount, because it is largely, that's right, it was Summer on the Mount. It is largely about living as a dual citizen. How do you acknowledge that you are a dual citizen? And then how do you seek first the kingdom of God?
Right.
While you are still being a citizen of the kingdom of earth.
Right.
That's what you have to do.
Yep.
Is you've got to recognize I'm a dual citizen. Which kingdom am I putting first? Which kingdom am I feeding? But can I manage to live in both?
Yeah. It makes me wonder, like, we don't, supposedly Daniel had all this wisdom that was for that day and in that culture, but we don't really read about it. What we read about is his excellent spirit.
That's right.
We read about his relationship with God.
Yep.
And so he clearly had some, understanding and knowledge and wisdom of that day, and he learned the culture and he did it. But man, what he's known for, what he's remembered for, what's written in the history books is his faith in the Lord. And I want that to be said. I want that to be said of me.
Same.
Yeah. Closing, pastoral encouragements or other verses or texts that you guys would want to encourage people with before we kind of shut this down. Similar. I just had kingdoms and leaders come and go. We've got the history of that, and yet, in the end, it really is what we just talked about, is just being faithful in what God says. So,
you have something?
I do, but I can go now or later. You go first.
I'll go first. I don't think we've talked about this. There's a phrase in here, and this is where we have to be careful pastorally, not to say things where people think we're being overly prescriptive about things, because this verse in the verse 23, no kind of harm was found on him because he had trusted in his God. Well, the natural follow-up question is not, well, if I'm harmed or if I'm not healed or if I'm not, does that mean I'm not trusting God? No. This is a particular situation, particular circumstances with a particular outcome, and God chose to move this particular way, this particular time. So this isn't once for all true for all situations, for all things. So we continue to pray. We can take that away. We continue to trust God. We can take that away, but we have to leave the results up to God, because that's pretty much true all the way through the book of Daniel. Like we see all the victories, right? We don't know the losses he incurred along the way. He's been there for 70 years almost, but don't let a verse like that make you doubt your faith or the faith of someone that you love, just because the times are still hard. So that would be a pastoral encouragement.
Yeah. I think this kind of goes with what you are both saying a tiny bit. I think it's important for us to realize that some of what this chapter teaches is that we can infer that obedience in the small things, like praying 3 times a day facing Jerusalem, gives us the spiritual muscle to be able to obey in the big things. I think that's a principle throughout humanity. No one thinks that if you can't lift, bench press, the 70-pound bar, you're going to be able to bench press 250 pounds. No one thinks that. But spiritually, we must think that, because we only want to be like, faithful in the big things. Well, you got to build those muscles.
That's good.
Daniel was faithful. He was obedient in the little things. And so when it came time to be obedient in the big thing, like getting in the lion's den, it was muscle memory for him. He was like, all right, here we go. And so that would be my encouragement.
That's good.
It is really good. And I know I'm tired because I immediately go right to, I want to give a football example, and I want to give...
Wait, are we about to talk about the Commanders?
Commanders, because they're doing great. And I can tell you why they're doing great, because what Lori just said, they're doing the small things right. Anyway, I digress.
We'll let you have it. We'll let you have it, Joey. He actually has not talked about the Commanders at all. And I think he's afraid he's going to curse it.
I don't want to,
Right, you don't want to jinx it?
Let's not talk about it right now, as a matter of fact. All right, we got one more in us, and so come back next week. Thanks.